The Church of Our Fathers by Roland H. Bainton. Chapter 13. Deadly Sins Enter the Church. Deadly sins invade the Church. The sins of luxury and pride came in after the papacy returned to Rome. Then churchmen became very elegant, spending some money, to be sure, on beautiful churches and pictures and books, but more on cards and banquets, costly robes, and gorgeous processions. The popes became so mighty that they had to be carried in magnificent chairs on the shoulders of warriors. Even the monasteries, which started as a protest against the laxity of the clergy, in turn became easygoing. Saint Benedict had said that the keeper of the cellar should not be overly fond of eating, but the figure at the head of this chapter is evidently not free from the sin of gluttony. Now, there are other reasons why people get fat. So I'm crouching. If I stand up, my stomach's, not slouching, that's the right word. There's irritable bowel and other reasons, but some people don't have regular exposure to food, or they can't afford good food. Anyways, the common folk fell from the faith of high religion to mere magic. The Lord's Supper was used like a charm. According to one story, a woman kept a piece of the bread in her mouth, took it home, and put it in the beehive in hope of more honey, whereupon the bees built around it an entire cathedral in honeycomb. Well, so the story goes. The Virgin Mary came to be regarded as a wonder worker to pull people out of scraps. Legend told that a man signed a contract to give his soul to the devil. When the time came, the man appealed to the Virgin Mary, who forced the devil to bring her the contract. Because who really answers? A story of Mary's help is told in 4 scenes on page 122 as follows. The man prays to the Virgin. The crowd teases the bull. The bull charges the man, for the Virgin stops the bull. Again, your deeds act out what you're going to act out, but don't just magically think that if you mess up in your action that, my magical protection will stop me. That's, trust in God and tie your camel, as the old adage goes. The deadly sins and magic in religion sapped the life of the Church. Its power grew less. Many attempts at reform were made all over Europe. In England, John Wycliffe tried to improve things. His idea was to get the regular priests to teach the people out of the Bible. To do so, they must have the Bible in English. Wycliffe persuaded several scholars to make a translation. The worst trouble was that when it was done, they had no printing press to make many copies. Here is a sample of how Wycliffe himself translated in his sermons. The form and spelling have been somewhat changed. Well, because older English, but a man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said unto his father, Father, give me a portion of the substance that falls to me. And the father departed him his goods, and soon after this young man gathered all that fell to him, and went forward on a pilgrimage into far country. And there he wasted his goods, and after that he had ended all his goods, there fell a great hunger in the land, and he began to be needy. And he went out and cleaved to one of the citizens of that country, and the citizen sent him into his town to keep swine. And the son coveted to fill his belly with peas, husks that the hogs ate, and no man gave him. So, the illustrations that I talked about right there. I remember a story of this guy that these people dressed up like a devil to kind of lead him to scare him into Christianity. And the guy and the guy showed up in a costume with horns and hooves and says, "Oh, you're a vegetarian. You can't hurt me," and rolls over. Anyways, that's a wider version of that elsewhere I've narrated. But Wycliffe became so critical of the church that his movement was pulled down in England, but gained a hold in Bohemia, for the English king at that time happened to be married to a Bohemian princess. In that country, John Huss preached like Savonarola against the churchmen who rode on horses with tassels streaming and kept off the people with their silver clubs. For sayings like these, Huss was accused of heresy and brought to trial at a council of the Church of Constance. Well, heresy's the key to temporal and spiritual enlightenment, isn't it? He claimed that he had never taught what he was accused of teaching. He must take it back anyway, he was told. But how could he take back what he had never taught? He refused and was condemned to be burned. Here he's shown being led to the stake. Now, I do not believe in a spiritual path that requires extra donations to build buildings, but the requiring of alms to pay clergy and to build fancy buildings. Let's take care of the poor first if we're going to require alms. All Bohemia, as a result, flamed in revolt and actual war. The picture in the next page shows some of the Bohemians fighting behind a large shield on which are carved a goblet and a goose. The goblet is the chalice or cup of the Lord's Supper, because the Bohemians insisted on giving wine to the laity instead of the bread only. The goose stands for Huss, because Huss, pronounced Hus, means goose. And, okay, the goose having a thing, but in Spain, the movement of reform was led by Cardinal Ximenes. Is that how you say it? Ximenes, who accepted high office only when others almost dragged him from a quiet Franciscan retreat. First, Queen Isabella desired him for a confessor. He consented only on condition that, when not needed to hear her confessions, he might return to the friars, but she confessed so often that the brothers soon saw him but seldom. The queen discovered that he was a wise adviser, not only about the soul, but about the state. Offices were then forced upon him until he became the chancellor of the state and a cardinal of the church. Yet he still went barefoot, and in the meanest Franciscan cowl. Remember, the cowl is on my channel video. When on high occasions the Pope ordered him to wear his gorgeous robes and cardinal's hat, streaming with tassels, Ximenes obeyed, but kept next to his skin a coarse shirt of hair. The barefoot... why are you forcing hardship upon yourself? What good does that do? The barefoot cardinal started out to reform the friars of Spain. They must live the rule or leave the country. Queen Isabella, the general of the Franciscans at Rome, the Pope thought him too severe, but he overpowered them all with the conviction that his way was the undoubted will of heaven. Like Wycliffe, he desired to spread the Bible, and could do so the better because, by his time, printing had been discovered. Ximenes was the first to print the whole Bible in the original language. It's the Old Testament in Hebrew. Actually, it wasn't Hebrew, it's Aramea. That's what they called it, and there were some serious issues in the changing of meaning, like Solomon's destroying the temple and stuff like this, if you read it fluent in Hebrew. And the New Testament in Greek. The complete work was brought out in the year 1522 and is called the Complutensian Polyglot. The Complutensian, because printed in the last town of Complutum and Polyglot because, in more than one language, there are several copies of this book now in America. The printing press was used for many other religious books besides the Bible. A group of men called the Humanists took to print the works of the early leaders of the church, all of whose writings up to this time had, of course, been only in manuscripts. Here is one of the Humanists in his study. Note the flowers on the ledge. Now for the first time St. Augustine was printed, and St. Jerome, and St. Ambrose, and many others. The idea was abroad that the declining church and the declining world needed to be reborn by going back to the great days of old Greece and Rome and of the early church. This rebirth is called the Renaissance. Now, using philosophy upon one, to express and understand one's faith, philosophy being methodology, rather than just copying and regressing. That's probably would have been more effective. But one of the greatest of the humanists of the Renaissance was Erasmus of Rotterdam in Holland. He did not care where he was born, for he wanted to belong to all the world. He did more than any other to print the works of the Church Fathers, and he has the honor of having first printed the New Testament in Greek. This was in 1516, 6 years before Ximenes brought the entire Bible in the original tongues, those compilations. Erasmus also retold the Bible stories in simple language. Here's an example of a part of a parable from the prodigal son from an early English translation of his work. The young man ariseth. Back goeth he, therefore home again all the way. He had come, weeping and sighing all the way, whereas he had before departed from his father, as pert and fierce. Did I draw attention to that illustration there? As pert and fierce, and as rash and willful as could be, thou hast here a plain pattern, and an example declared unto thee of a man returning from extreme naughtiness. Now behold a pattern of the gracious mercifulness of God. The young man was not full come to his father's house. When the father espied him coming afar off, he did that more tenderly love of the two did first espy the other. He saw his sons coming, wondrous, ugly, and piteous to behold. He saw him ragged, hungry, starving, filthy, lamenting, sighing, and weeping. This very sight, being so piteous, began by and by to move the father's heart. He runneth forth to meet the young man, as the same was coming towards him, and caught his son about the neck and kissed him. Erasmus was a preacher who poked gentle fun at the magical religion of the people, and scorched the deadly sins of the churchmen. The folly of trusting to the saints is shown in the story that he told of a shipwreck. The waves were heaving the vessel almost up to the moon and dropping it again as if it were sinking to hell. Many of the passengers prayed to the saints and to the Virgin Mary for help. A fat Frenchman called in a loud voice to the statue in Paris of St. Christopher, the patron saint of travelers, promising, if saved, to give the saint a candle as big as himself. A bystander nudged the Frenchman and suggested he should not promise too much. "Oh," said he in a low tone, lest St. Christopher should hear, "Fool, do you think I mean what I say? If I once get to shore, I will not give him as much as a tallow candle." The storyteller was asked whether he would not pray to the saints. "No," said he, "for St. Peter, who would perhaps hear the soonest, is at the gate of heaven, and while he was going to tell God, I might go to the bottom. I am going to speak to God straight." When the ship broke up, one man took hold of a wooden, worm-eaten image of the Virgin, which soaked up with water, and took him to the bottom. A woman with a little child was strapped to a stout plank. She got to shore. So did the storyteller, of course, who preferred a bag of cork to a golden candlestick. Now, a real God, you can definitely be direct about one's worship, can't you? Again, the greed and warlike anger of churchmen Erasmus grew hot. War, especially when led by popes, for the sake of the goods of the church, seemed to him quite contrary to the spirit of Christ. The monk in armor was for him the very worst denial of the way of Jesus. How is it, said he, that when Christ said, "My peace I leave with you," the followers of Christ go out to battle with cross on their banners, and even cannons are stamped with the names of the apostles Peter and Paul? The lights were dim, but in many a corner a candle was burning. Along the valley of the Rhine River in Germany, where a group of quiet folk who called themselves the Friends of God. They did not start a church of their own, nor a monastery, but they kept in touch with one another and tried to revive the love of their Lord. Certainly private study groups, that's kind of how Sufism and some other stuff started, but another similar group in Holland called themselves the Brethren of the Common Life. They usually lived together and shared their goods, spending most of their time in teaching. Some spread their ideal by teaching, one here, one there, in schools and universities. From this group came a book which has been almost as much translated and read as the Bible. It is called The Imitation of Christ. We are not perfectly sure which brother wrote it, but the author is supposed to have been Thomas à Kempis. The book sings of love.